But what chapter, where are we at now? Anybody know? Where?
4E.
No, we did 4E. We're on lesson 5. We're moving out of Genesis. Okay, y'all said way out of Genesis, finally. We're going to Exodus. So hopefully you've been looking at Exodus ahead of us, okay? So we're in Exodus today. Of course, we all have a background understanding something about Exodus, of course, because the nation Israel is in slavery at this time in the book of Exodus. If you turn to Exodus chapter 1, we'll be in chapter 1, 2, and 3, and 4 this morning. I'll show you that in a moment here. But for this opening, just to realize that Exodus is about the beginning of Israel as a nation. Now just stop and think before we go further on this. What have we read already in Genesis? What have we seen in Genesis through all of this? Let me sum it up to you. We've seen in Genesis, after the flood, the people tried to do what? They tried to build Tower of Babel. A key point, Tower of Babel. And God told them, God had to do what? Confuse their languages so they couldn't do that. So they had to spread out to do that. But we see after that what happening, that God selects who to work through? Abraham. Key, Abraham. Selects one guy and his family to become the nation Israel. And he works through Abraham, through that. And with that, Abraham, of course, we saw about what? Abraham, his son is who? Isaac, and his son is one of the other sons. He had two. Jacob, key person, okay? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, key people, right? And after Jacob had many sons, of course, remember that. And he had one particular son who became prime minister of Egypt. Who was that? Joseph. And with Joseph being the prime minister, lack of another term, being prime minister of Egypt, did what for Jacob's family, for their whole family? What is it? Save them from starving. And it's amazing how the Lord used this dream that was given to Pharaoh and for Joseph to interpret that dream for him. He had two dreams, of course, but he interpreted both, and both indicated one thing. What was that? What was the dream, both dreams indicating? I'm sorry? You're talking about Joseph's dream. I'm sorry, I'm talking about Pharaoh's dream. Joseph's dream. Joseph had his dream. I'm sorry, I forgot to say that. Joseph's dream was about his brothers and his family would bow down to him. And of course, they laughed at him like, this is ridiculous. They were against him, and of course, he went into slavery. But I'm talking about the dream that Pharaoh had. There was two dreams that he had, and what was the indication for those two dreams? 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine, of course, which was going to impact a lot of people. Egypt and the world around him, of course, neighbors around him, of course. And so with Joseph being in position, he also saved his family in a sense. And did he not say to his brothers about the whole situation? Were they not afraid of him? Once he revealed himself to them, they were afraid of him, were they not? Because he was the second most powerful guy in this kingdom, could do what? He'd do whatever he wanted to do. But what did he do? He forgave them. That's the key. He forgave them. He saw it what? He said, God meant this for our good. He meant this. He worked it all out for God. He gave God the glory. That's what you need to see that about Joseph. Joseph always gave God the glory about everything. Even when he was in prison, he gave God the glory. No matter what. He was always, the focus was seeing the Lord, keeping that in viewpoint. So when the families come there, they all come together there in Egypt, of course. His family, his brothers, his dad, and all them show up. Joseph gives them what? Gives them some prime real estate to live in. And they're considered shepherds. And of course, the Egyptians don't like shepherds. They think they're low-class people. We have the tendency to think that in our own minds of certain people. You're a ditch digger? Well, you're down here. But you're a doctor? Oh, hi, doctor. How you doing? We have a tendency to do that, unfortunately. But the person who's digging that ditch is just a very important person in what they're doing. People need to do that. Somebody needs to do this job. But the Egyptians had a tendency to think, well, shepherds, we don't want to have anything to do with you people. So that helped them. That really helped Israel, you think about it. Because it kept them, even though they were in a strange land, among Egyptians, where they were at, they were what? They were kind of like secluded in a way, and they grew in the meantime. And you see that happening They were growing. And in the meantime, they're growing. You're going to turn to Exodus chapter 1. We're going to see where it talks about here, because after Joseph died, there was a time period, there was a king that rose up who did not know Joseph, did not know anything about Joseph, what he had done, of course. And with that in mind, he looked to subdue the Israelis, the Hebrews, okay? Well, what I'm trying to get to is all of that switches over here, switching over to this nation to grow, and it grew inside Egypt. The nation of Israel really grew during this time. So turn to chapter Exodus. We'll go ahead and look at that. You've probably already read that, what I have up there. It is the record of how God multiplied Israel into a nation in Egypt and brought Israel out of Egypt with a mighty hand to establish Israel as a light to the nations. This is important to understand. Excuse me. Israel's purpose was to give the world the law, the scriptures, Christ, and the eternal kingdom which is promised to David and which will be ruled by Christ. The Lord chose Abraham, chose him as to be a nation, to be Israel, as his chosen people. We understand it. We hear that. We know that. He didn't choose the people in China. He didn't choose the people in America. He didn't choose the people in other countries. He chose this nation, Israel, to be his people. And for this, he gave them what? He gave them the scriptures to come from them. He gave them the law. You'll see that as we go along through this, as we're going through this. But of course, the Lord Jesus Christ will become from the lineage of Israel. So looking at this, a little bit more background here. Now I know that you start seeing these dates and the dates kind of blend together and all that, but we'll go touch on this and we'll explain. From about 1675 to 1570 BC, Egypt was ruled by a Semitic group of people known as the Hyksos. Racially and linguistically, if I say the word right, these rulers were very similar to the Hebrew people. They were foreigners that were ruling the Egyptians. Okay? While this may have worked to the advantage of the Hebrews during the reign of the Hyksos, it also worked to their disadvantage in this anti-Semitic reaction of the Egyptians in the 18th dynasty, which followed. After the 18th dynasty followed, and the Egyptians took back over as leaders, took over away from this group here. And here's one of the pharaohs here. He ascended the throne of the new kingdom to begin the 18th dynasty, and he ruled till his death, 1546, okay. But in the meantime, there was pharaohs that were come, but they did not have sons as descendants. And it's kind of looking unstable here for them because they have no sons, but they had pharaohs that were appointed. This seeming lack of stability within the new kingdom would no doubt only serve to magnify the concerns of the people over both real and perceived threats to their national security. When the Egyptians took back over as pharaohs, instead of this Hyksos family group having rule of them, taking back over, the concern was these Hebrews. They're growing. We need to do something about them. And so you see this new kingdom that comes up here is about these Egyptians, is about the Israel. It will turn down here in a second. We'll go ahead now. In Exodus chapter 1 and verse 8. Now arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. And he said unto his people, Behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. And come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply, and it come to pass that when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land. Therefore they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens. And they built the Pharaoh's treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. And they were grieved because of the children of Israel. And the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage and mortar, and in brick, and in all manner of service in the field, all their service within they made them serve was with rigor. And the king of Egypt spake to the Hebrew midwives, of which the name of the one was Shaphan, and the other Pua, if I say it right. And he said, when you do office of the midwife to the Hebrew women and see them upon the stools, if it be a son, then you shall kill him, and if it be a daughter, then she shall live. And the midwives feared God and did not as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the men children alive. And the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said unto them, Why have you done this thing and have saved the men children alive? And the midwives said unto Pharaoh, Because the Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women, for they are lively and are delivered ere the wives come in unto them. Therefore God dealt with the midwives, and the people multiplied and waxed very mighty. And it came to pass, because the midwives feared God, that he made them houses. And Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, Every son that is born of ye shall cast, that is born, ye shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive. So here's the setting here. The Egyptians are doing what? Trying to destroy the Israel. And Israel's doing what? Growing. They keep growing. They're being blessed by God. No matter how hard it's being imposed upon them, the rigor that they got from their taskmaster, they are still growing and growing here. And of course, the Lord uses these midwives for this. So you're going to see in the next chapter here, let's move on here. Let me stop right there. Let me just do this is a handout that you've had before. You've seen this before, this timeline, the overview of the timeline. But I want you to focus, and we'll see here, focus on this part here, as you see where it talks about, we're going to talk about Mount Sinai later on, but where Moses is born here, we're getting ready to talk about Moses this morning, is where we're going to get to. And we're going to focus on that. But I want you to see, in this timeline that you've seen before, again, this is where we're at along the process of this time. So for the lessons, so I laid this out the best I can for you. We're going to talk about Moses this morning. That's the key thing. The lessons, this part, the lesson that you got in chapter 5 of your book. Of course, you see I got 5A, 5B, and 5C. And Lord willing, that's the direction I'm going to go for right now. I would love to go further, but we'll see how that works out. But for right now, we're going to talk about Moses, his birth, of course. We're going to talk about here in the next chapter. And we're going to talk about his calling by the Lord, of course. And then we're going to talk about the Exodus itself and, of course, Israel at Mount Sinai. And I'm also, as I go through, and I'm putting it together now. I haven't got it all together, but I was trying to illustrate the books, which you already know about Genesis. But Exodus, when you get to Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, how do those four go together in relation of time to Israel? And I'm putting that together. And hopefully I'll have that illustration for you next week so you'll see that. So you understand how they tie together here. But right now we're going to talk about Moses. So we're going to talk about chapter 2 here. We're getting chapter 2. When you get to chapter 2 here, you're going to see, and there went a man of the house of the Levi and took to wife a daughter of Levi. Now let me ask you this. At this point in time, Levi, are they the priests yet? No. They're not priests yet, because that's going to happen later in this book. You'll see later on it takes place. But he is of the tribe of Levi, which is very important, okay, that you'll see this. And the woman conceived and bare a son, and when she had saw that he was a goodly child, excuse me, she hid him 3 months. And when she could not longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrushes and dabbed it with slime and with pitch and put the child therein and laid it into the flags by the river bank. And his sister stood afar off to wit what would be done to him. So let's just stop right there. I don't know if you've seen something here already, but Moses is born, but he already had what? A sister. He already had a sister. And really he had another brother, Aaron, which was already, you'll see Aaron later on when it comes up later on, because Aaron's a little bit older than him. So I don't know how he escaped by this part of this rule by Pharaoh about getting rid of all the male children, but Aaron is his older brother, of course, and he has a sister. The sister's name is Miriam. You'll see her name later on, of course. You won't see it here show up. So Miriam is over to the side, but interesting. The rule, the instruction from Pharaoh was to do what to the male children? Put them where? Where? Cast them in the river. Let the crocodiles eat them up. Be done. His mom puts him in the river, but with safety, into this basket, with safety here. And the sister is watching and keeping this. And you're probably familiar with this whole story and all of that, but see this. But the thing is, I'm trying to point out, if you see these bullets here, some of things about Moses' life, how a little differently it is for him. He's of the tribe of Levi. His birth was miraculous because of the midwives. The midwives didn't go around killing all the male babies. Okay, so he was saved from that. His parents hid him for 3 months, purposely hid him for 3 months because they loved him, of course. And he was found by Pharaoh's daughter, of all people to be found by Pharaoh's daughter. Interesting. Not by some other Egyptian down along the river somewhere, but by Pharaoh's daughter he was found. Of course, his older sister looked after him in chapter 2, verses 7 through 8. And of course, his parents' faith. We'll get there in a moment. But some of these things around Moses' life is very important. If you were here during the revival meeting, you heard Brother Harper talked about Moses, how great how Moses was great in everything. How the Lord just used Moses. But how the Lord also worked in Moses' life at the very beginning of all of this, bringing us all together for Moses to come into this world and to serve this purpose here. Were there other Hebrew boys and children born? Yes, there was many of them being born. Just like you saw earlier, there was many of these being born. The Hebrew were growing, with men, with boys and girls were just growing with children. But here, God chose this guy Moses for a special purpose and put Moses in a special place to be found by Pharaoh's daughter. You see how this all worked out. God did this by God's hand doing all of this. So by virtue of having a royal foster mother, Moses was assured the finest possible education of the day. Scripture reports Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. Now back up a little second here. When he was found by by Pharaoh's daughter, verse 5, and the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river, and her maidens walked along by the riverside, and when she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. And when she had opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the babe wept, and she had compassion on him, and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." And then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call to thee a nurse of the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for thee?" And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." And the maid went and called who? His mother. She is right there helping this whole situation. And interesting, I'm going to stop here a second. Pharaoh's daughter recognized something about Moses. What was it? He was a Hebrew. Now, how carelessly was he looking? It must be some kind of... But she knew he was a Hebrew child. But she did what? What was the rule? The rule was to do what? Get rid of him. But she did not do that rule. She did not follow that rule either. The law, or however you want to call it. So down here in verse 9, and Pharaoh's daughter said unto her, "Take this child away and nurse it for me, and I will give thee thy wages." And the woman took the child and nursed it. And the child grew and brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she called his name Moses, and she said, "Because I drew him out of the water." How about you moms? Wouldn't it be great? Somebody pays you to take care of your children, to raise your child. She got paid to raise him. It worked out. So with that in mind, he's raised in the house, Pharaoh's family, among the Pharaoh. And with that, that's why pointing out here, it says in Acts chapter 7, verse 22, Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. Another interesting thing about this is that in Moses' life, being chosen, selected, and all this, and everything, how the Lord is just directing everything in this. To direct Moses to be eventually going to be a leader, you'll see this later, we know this, to be the leader of a large nation, but also the learning that he had to do. What is also known, you'll know about this later on, but you already know it, but what about Moses? What he does later on, he does what? He writes 5 books. Doesn't he? He writes 5 books also. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. He writes those up. Okay? So getting down here, what happens? And it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown and he went out unto his brethren and looked on their burdens, he spied an Egyptian smiting a Hebrew, one of his brethren. And he looked this way and that way, and when he saw that there was no man, he slew the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. And when he went out the second day, behold, 2 men of the Hebrews strove together, and he said to him that had did the wrong, Wherefore smitest thou thy fellow? And he said, Who made thee a prince and a judge over us? Intendest thou to kill me as thou killedst the Egyptian? And Moses feared and said, Surely this thing is known. When Moses is growing up, he's 40 years old at this time. But I think he always knew he was what? A Hebrew. He probably knew the whole thing about him being found and all that. And Mom probably told him that as well, all this. But he knew this. And this happened. And going down here to verse, this right here, this note here. The book of Hebrews gives the background of this event. If you want to turn to Hebrews chapter 11, verse 24. We'll back it up here. We'll go to verse 23, pick up by Moses. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hid 3 months of his parents because they saw he was a proper child, and they were not afraid of the king's commandment. By faith, Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, and choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. For by faith he forsook Egypt, and fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing as one who is invisible. We'll talk about this later, about verse 8, 20, about the Passover, later on. He realized he was a Hebrew, and he realized taking this stand was going to do what? And jeopardize his life. And it did jeopardize his life, so he fled to course to get away of this. I do not understand all that. I don't understand him taking a life. I can see him doing it. You know, you think about it, he took a person's life to do this, to escape. But he was saving somebody else's life, I think is what he was doing here, to do that. So he flees, he goes down to Midian. If you see down here, go down here to chapter 2. And when Pharaoh heard this thing, he sought to slay Moses. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. He escapes from Egypt, escapes from Pharaoh to get to safety here in Midian. Y'all are probably very familiar with this whole events that took place. And the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. And the shepherds came and drove them away. But Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. And when they came to rule their father, he said, How is it that ye are come so soon today? And they said, his daughters said to him, An Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds, and also drew water enough for us and watered the flock. And he said unto his daughters, And where is he? Why is it that ye have left the man? Call him that he may eat bread. And Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Moses Zipporah his daughter, and she bare him a son, and he called his name Gershom, and for he said, I have been a stranger in a strange land. You're familiar with this probably story, what took place and how he fled from Egypt. He goes down here to Midian. How long does he stay in Midian? Anybody have any ideas? 40 years. He's 40 years old when he leaves Egypt. He's going to be 80 years old when God calls him. I don't know how many in this room is 80 years old. I'm looking around. We know a few that are 80 or above. But you think about that. We'll see about this later, a second career at 80 years old, really. But here he's in safety. He's with Reuel, his father-in-law. He's married. He starts having children, and he's out here for 40 years. God had an important work for Moses to do, and for this he must be prepared. That work was to lead his people out of Egypt and conduct them unto the promised inheritance, and for this work Moses was not yet equipped. When he slew the Egyptian there, And he fled. He was not ready to lead the people out of the land yet. And it was not the timing yet for that to take place. Because when that guy asked the question, that one said, who made, in verse 14, who made thee a prince and a judge over us? Eventually they're going to see he was a prince and going to be a judge over them. He was going to be that. But at this time, the question was asked, and he just trying to get out of there for his own safety. He was not ready for that. In a place of retirement, in a sense, being out there on the backfield of the back country there, Moses spent the second 40 years of his life, a place where every opportunity to commune with God was afforded him. You go down to verse 23, and it came to pass in the process of time, the king of Egypt died. And the children of Israel sighed by reason of the bondage, and they cried, and their cry came up unto God by reason of the bondage. And God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God had respect unto them. You're going to see this later on in the book of Judges when it happens a lot of times. The cycle that happens in the book of Judges, when the people are pressed and eventually they call out to God. And here you're going to see that they called out to God, and God's going to answer their prayer, of course. It's taken a while, it's taken 40 years, But it says here they were crying out to him. So when you look in chapter 3 and verse 1, you're going to see down there about Moses here. We're going about being revealed. Excuse me. Let me get a drink here. I can't hardly. Y'all put me on a lot of pressure here. That's what it is. I want to blame it on you. And then what we're supposed to do? Blame it on somebody else? All right, down here where it says in Exodus chapter 3. I get this, you see the bullets here. I get this from Dr. Cloud's book, and I thought it was interesting how he sums this up together here. But we're going to go look down here. Now Moses kept the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the backside of the desert and came to the mountain of God, even Horeb. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire out of the midst of the bush, and looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the smoke was not consumed. Can you imagine that? He's been out here in this desert for 40 years, and now he sees this bush burning, but it's not burning. It looks like it's burning, but it's not burning up. He'd been out here. He probably knows this territory. He's been here all these 40 years being around here, leading these sheep, taking care of them out there, taking care of the flocks, whatever it might be in the flocks. It might be sheep, might be goats, whatever he's taking care of. But now he sees this. And who is this that's appeared to him? It's the Lord that's appeared to him now. How about in our lives sometimes? We get, hey, Lord, you're praying about something and it seems like it takes forever. It's like, well, why isn't it going to the quick, like Hardee's or somewhere I can get it faster, or go to the Dairy Queen and get something faster. But when I pray, it takes a long time. And here, with Moses praying, it takes a long time. It took almost 40 years for this to come about. When those people were groaning and all that in Egypt, it took almost 40 years for that to take place. Because it was what? It was God's timing when this takes place. The key is God's leadership. God's leadership, his timing, his leadership in everything. So down here it says, and Moses said, I will turn now inside and see this great sight, why the bush is not burnt. And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called unto him out of the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, here am I. Stop here for a second. The Lord did what? He saw what? He saw Moses do what? Pardon? Come towards him, didn't he? Moses could have looked at that, maybe lightning hit the bush or something. I don't know. I'll just go this way. But he went towards the bush. He made that move to go towards that. And it says, and when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called unto him out of the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, here am I. And he said, draw not nigh hither, put off thy shoes from off thy feet, for the place wherein thou standest is holy ground. Moreover, he said, I am the God of thy father, and the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. And the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt, and have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters. For I know I know their sorrows, and I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them out of their land unto a good land. Remember what Brother Harper said about that? He said it was what? A good land. And we remember, if you were here when we talked about when Moses and when they sent the spies into the land. A good land, enlarged unto a land flowing with milk and honey, unto the place of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites. Now therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel is come unto me, and I have also seen the oppression wherein the Egyptians oppressed them. Now come now, therefore, and I will send thee unto Pharaoh, that thou mayest bring forth my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. Going down to verse 14, yeah. And Moses said unto God, who am I, that I should go up unto Pharaoh, and that I should bring forth the children of Israel out of Egypt? And he says, certainly I will be with thee, and this shall be a token unto thee, that I have sent thee. When thou hast brought forth the people out of Egypt, ye shall serve God upon this mountain. And Moses said unto God, behold, when I am come unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, the God of your fathers has sent me unto you, and they say unto me, what is his name? What shall I say unto them? And God said unto him, Moses, I am that I am. And he said, thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I am that has sent me unto you. And God said moreover unto Moses, thou shalt say unto thy children of Israel, the Lord God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me unto you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial unto all generations. Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say unto them, and I'm going to stop right there. So you see these bullets here I got here together for you is what Dr. Cloud puts together. God reveals him as a mighty, holy and mighty God to be honored and feared in chapter 3, verse 5, as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he says that again, because that's very important to understand, for them to understand. I'm the same God for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he also said for your own father. Talk about his father, Moses' father as well. As the God who is near, who sees and cares, as I am. Now you see over here is the John chapter 8, verse 5. I don't know if you've seen that. When Jesus said this. When Jesus said in John chapter 8 and verse 57, I'll go there. Then said the Jews unto him, thou art not yet 50 years old, and hast thou seen Abraham? And Jesus said unto him, verily, verily, I say unto you, before Abraham was, I am. And of course, when they heard that, they took up stones to cast at him. But Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple, going through the midst of them, and so passed by. When those people heard that, they were what? They knew exactly what he was referring to, didn't they? They understood what he was referring to, that he was God, when he said he was I am. So at this time, God revealed himself by name, I am, which implies what? He is self-sufficient God, the eternal existence of God, the self-sufficiency of God. Charles McIntosh says, Jehovah is taking this title and was furnishing his people with a blank check to be filled up in any moment. When he said he was the I am, what does that mean to them? He's the everlasting God. There's no one else. He is self-existing. It's him. Because they live in a country in Egypt with what? Multiple of gods that they had. I mean, they had gods for everything. You know, gods for the crocodile, gods for everything. You'll see that being challenged later on, the 10 plagues. But all these gods that they looked at. But here the Lord God is telling Moses that he is the God. All those are false gods. All those are dead things. But he is the God who is eternal. Of course, Moses' excuses. If you look down here in chapter 4, verse down there, we'll look at this. And Moses answered and said, but behold, they will not believe me, nor hearken unto my voice, for they will say, the Lord hath not appeared unto thee. And the Lord said unto him, what is that in thine hand? And he said, a rod. Now, God already knows what he's got in his hand, but he's trying to get Moses to recognize what he's got in his hand, because he's going to make use of this thing, this rod, of course. But Moses has these excuses, and God's going to help him along with this. As you see the statement here, Moses' excuse indicated he was more fearful of his reception by his people than he was talking about Pharaoh, of course. But going down here in verse 3, and he said, cast it. God said, cast it on the ground, and he cast it on the ground. And it became a serpent, and Moses fled from before it. And the Lord said unto Moses, put forth thine hand and take it by the tail. And he put forth his hand and caught it, and it became a rod in his hand, that they may believe that the Lord God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, hath appeared unto thee. I'm not much of a snake handler myself. I don't know about y'all. I try to avoid them if I can help it. But I bet that bit is scary when you see a snake, all of a sudden this rod becomes a snake, you know. And it gets around this time of year, we start seeing snakes start showing up. I don't know about y'all. You do see them show up. But he did exactly what the Lord told him to do what? Throw the rod on the ground, and it became a snake. And of course, it scared him. But the Lord told him what to do, how to pick the snake up. Take it from the tail and pick it up, and it became the rod again. This was a miracle to see it happening take place. And in verse 5, and that they may believe, in verse 6, and the Lord said furthermore unto him, put now thine hand into thy bosom. And he put his hand into his bosom, and when he took it out, it became his hand was leprous as snow. I bet that would scare you. I bet that would scare you. Put your hand in and pull it out, and it turns white. And knowing what leprosy is, how dangerous leprosy is, when a person gets a leprosy, is there a cure for it? No. And that would be a shocker, to see that. And he says in verse 8, and it came to pass if they will not, and he said, verse 7, I'm sorry. And he said, put thine hand into thy bosom again. And he put his hand into his bosom again and plucked it out of his, it says he plucked it out. What does that mean? I'm pulling that thing right back out. I'm pulling it back out, man. It's coming out quick. He didn't gradually pull it out. I think he pulled that thing out as quick as he could. Says here, he plucked it out of his bosom, and behold, it was turned again as his other flesh. And it came to pass, and it shall come to pass, if they will not believe thee, neither hearken to thy voice of the first sign, that they will believe the voice of the latter sign. And it came to pass, and it shall come to pass, if they will not believe also these two signs, neither hearken unto thy voice, that thou shalt take the water of the river and pour it upon the dry land, and the water which thou takest out of the river shall become blood upon the land. Of course, Moses has another excuse. His other excuse is, and Moses said unto the Lord, O my Lord, I am not eloquent, neither therefore, nor since thou hast spoken unto thy servant, but I am slow of speech and of a slow tongue. And the Lord said unto him, who hath made man's mouth? Or who maketh the dumb, or the deaf, or the seeing, or the blind? Hath not I, the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with thy mouth, and teach thee, and that what thou shalt say, thou shalt say. And he said, O my Lord, send, I pray thee, by the hand of him whom thou wilt send. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses. And he said, is not Aaron thy Levite, the Levite thy brother? I know that he can speak well. And also, behold, he cometh forth to meet thee. And when he shall see thee, he will be glad in his heart. And thou shalt speak unto him, and put words in his mouth. And I will be with thy mouth, and with his mouth, and will teach you what ye shall do. And he shall be the spokesman unto the people, and it shall be even as when he be thee instead of thy mouth, instead of a mouth, and thou shalt be to him instead of God. And thou shalt take the rod in thy hand, wherewith thou shalt do signs. Of course, Moses' other complaint was, I don't know how to speak right. Now, Moses was what? He had learned so many things from the Egyptian, but he realized, saying to himself, coming with that excuse, I don't know what to say. I'm not too good at writing things. I'm really not. I know that. I'm not good at writing. It's bullets. I can do bullets, but writing sentences, I don't have that knack for that. I know I don't have that. And I don't know about Moses having the knack of not being able to talk. Maybe being out on the desert for 40 years, not talking to a whole lot of people, I don't know. But he knows he's going to have to go before the people to lead them, and before Pharaoh as well. And the challenge, his other excuse is, I cannot do this. Maybe he's trying to get out of it. I don't know. Maybe it's, I just can't. God, you got the wrong person for this whole thing. But God has already proved to him what? 3 things he did for him. He showed him that God says, I'm with you. I can do these things. You can do this. It can be done. You've already had these examples given to you about the rod, about the leprous hand. You know, those things he's told him. And talking about the pouring of the blood, be able to pour the water into turning into blood. But Moses still wanted to have an excuse. But God said he was going to do what? Have his brother Aaron with him as well. So closing this up for today, and about time. For Adam to Christ, there is none greater than Moses. He is one of the few characters of Scriptures whose course is sketched upon his infancy to his death. The fierce light of criticism has been turned upon him for generations, but he is still the most commanding figure of the ancient world. In character, in faith, in the unique position assigned, and in the achievements, he stands first among the heroes of the Old Testament. All of God's early dealings with Israel were transacted through Moses. God called Moses for a purpose, to lead those people. And to lead those people, you'll see it, and you already know this. I know a lot of you already know this because you already know the Scriptures. Not just leading those people, but guiding them, giving them the Scriptures, telling them about, we're going to talk about the tabernacle is going to be provided. And all the 10 Commandments, of course. All these things are to be provided by use of Moses in his whole process of this. Any comments, any questions? Should be almost close to the first bell. That's what I was looking for. Anything? So Lord willing, we'll pick up after that, after this chapter here. I'm not going to go by chapter. There's no way we can do all that. But I just want to get this key part about Moses' life, the foundation here for this. Comments, any questions? All right, we'll go, Lord, in prayer, and we dismissed. I meant to tell you too, on here, if you wanted the slides that you saw about the timeline, I got copies of it still sitting up here again for you if you wanted that. Dear Lord, thank you for taking care of us. Thank you, Lord, we are able to come together this morning and help us to learn from your word, Lord, that would help us and apply it to our lives, and how you worked in people's lives, Lord, Moses' life and the people there, and what they went through, Lord, for examples to us. Bless this morning with the choir and the children's ministry and the bus ministry and all the ministries going on, and the prayer requests, Lord, of those who are having health issues they're dealing with. In Jesus' name we ask.